On this episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive, we're heading to the dyno to figure out if that extra 80 cents a gallon for premium is really worth it. What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive. Now, we already know that the higher octane that you run, ultimately the more power you can make, right? This is nothing new. You can run more timing, less risk of detonation, it just makes more power. But what I want to find out today is on a car that's designed to run both regular and premium, such as my Fiesta ST, how much power are you really making extra with premium on just a bone stock tune? There's a lot of cars nowadays that are tuned for both regular and premium, and I've just wondered, like, is it really worth that extra 80 cents a gallon? That equates to like $500 a year for me. So what we're gonna do is take this car to the dyno. We're gonna be going to TurnInConcepts, and they are a local tuning shop in the area, which obviously has a dyno. And we are going to be sticking this car on their dyno, running 87. It's currently running 87 right now. We're gonna do a couple runs, get a baseline, see how much it's making on their dyno. Then what we're gonna do is drain the tank, put in some 93, it's the highest octane I can get around here, just pump gas, and then stick it back on the dyno and run it again and see how much that gain is. Is it really worth that extra almost $1 per gallon? Huge thanks to TurnInConcepts for hosting us. Guys, I don't often go to shops. I try and do as much work as I can on my own, but sometimes you just need some specialty tools or specialty advice or whatever. I really trust these guys. I've been going to them for years. Check them out if you're anywhere in the Cincinnati area, TurnInConcepts.com. All right, guys, we've made it here to TurnInConcepts. Strapping the car down now. Gonna be doing our first run. This is gonna be on 87 octane, which is what it's already in there. We're gonna see what it puts down on just regular fuel.
We ended up doing 5 runs total, and it was interesting to see the results.
What are you seeing here, at least on the 87 runs, and I guess kind of what are you expecting to see? What do you want to look out for when we finally switch fuel?
Well, we're looking for a couple things. You can see on the first 2 runs, they were pretty consistent. That's kind of what you'd expect for the first 2 runs of a pull on a car, because the car is not heat soaked yet. It's not, intake temps aren't crazy high. The engine temp in general isn't crazy high. But then we pull up the next one, the third, you can see there was a drop in the higher RPM ranges. There's a really big difference in the top. I mean, I say really big, you know, we're talking peak numbers that are only 6 horsepower apart, but you can see a really big dip here that's probably closer to 15 horsepower, that's right about 5250. So that's what we're looking to see. If 93 changes that dip and eliminates the dip, is the dip related to detonation of the engine due to an octane deficiency, or is it just related to heat? And as you keep going with the runs, you can see that it actually ends up getting worse first to last. You can see a reduction in torque across the power band. You can see as well, because of the torque reduction, a drop in horsepower. Now I think we put the 93 in, see what happens, see if it changes.
So as Tony said, it's really interesting to see what this thing does on the dyno. Basically, not only are we really looking at peak powers, but we're also looking at the relationship between runs, because as he explained, detonation as the car gets hotter could get higher on 87. It'll be interesting to see when we switch to 93 what it does. So we're gonna run this thing dry on 87, fill it up with 93. It's Shell 93, so just for your guys' reference, top tier. And then we're gonna stick it back on the dyno and see what it does, so stay tuned.
We ended up doing 9 pulls on 93, and the difference was immediately apparent.
So these are the 93 pulls that we just did. Compared to the 87 pulls, they are way more consistent. We got to pull 5, and we were actually higher on horsepower-wise on pull 5 than we were on the first pull on 93, which is not what happened on 87 at all. We were about 20 horsepower, 17 horsepower, I think, under where we started when we were on 87. And then it just stayed there. I mean, it was very consistent. Pull after pull after pull, we wanted to see, you know, how many pulls we could do before it would start to drop off. And it really got into like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 8th pull-ish before it started to drop. And then even then, it's still kind of within the margin of error in terms of doing pull after pull on a dyno. Okay, so what we wanted to look at was the change in the best runs from 87 and 93. And what you can see here are those 2 runs. So the green run, it was the best run that we had on 87. The red run was the best run that we had on 93. And you can see they both start off pretty consistently with torque output at the low end. But then right about 3,500, you can see where the green kind of takes a dip down and starts to run out the torque curve. The red run on 93 keeps climbing a little bit, makes a little bit more torque. Looks like probably, you know, 220-ish versus close to 225, you know, maybe a 5 foot-pound difference. But it carries that all the way through the rev range, all the way up to 65, which equates to, you know, about a 10 horsepower change up top. And really, the peak horsepower, I mean, we're looking way out here, but solidly across the range, I mean, you're seeing gains throughout the entire thing. So these are the 2 worst runs from the respective fuels. And you can see here that whereas before on the 87 best run, we were at almost 220 foot-pounds of torque, now we're at probably 205, 208. So really a huge reduction in torque on 87 as the engine started to heat up. And then it just lost all that throughout the entire rev range and just dropped everywhere. As opposed to the 93, which still hit almost about the same peak torque value, 225 at about 3,500, which it did really well there and carried that out throughout the rest. I mean, really pretty darn close. So it lost 6 horsepower or so, 7 horsepower over best, but definitely more consistent. So really pretty close, same air-fuel ratio, which you'd expect. I mean, you wouldn't expect the ECU to really make drastic changes in the air-fuel ratio. You would think that would stay pretty much the same, which it's pretty much spot on between the 2 runs. What you would expect to see, though, if we were plugged into the ECU and we were looking at data off the ECU, you would expect to see a big difference in timing between those 2 runs, and I'm sure that that's what's going on.
All right, guys, so what did we learn here today? Obviously, 93 makes more than 87. Everyone knows that. We're not disputing that. What I wanted to know is it worth it? And how much of a difference is it on a stock car? And we figured that out today. So I think there are 2 interesting findings. One is the obvious one, that 93 made more power than 87, which we expected. But I think 2 is the consistency. 93 was so much more consistent than 87, and I think we can thank basically detonation for that, right? The drop off in power from 93, and we did way more runs on 93, was only 5 to 6 horsepower. The drop off on power on 87 was more in the magnitude of like 10, 11 horsepower. So it's really interesting to compare those differences. Now, for me, like I said, this video is really about, is it worth it? Now, obviously, if you're going to the track, if you always want the most performance possible, you run 93, no brainer, right? But for me, I think as I do occasional pulls on the street, and I would probably not see as much degradation in the engine getting super hot, it's probably not a big deal for me to run 87 all the time. I don't think this car is any less fun with just slightly less horsepower. Whether or not you can feel that 10 horsepower or not is up to you guys. Once again, you guys draw your own conclusions, but for me, it's an interesting finding. I think obviously the consistency issue is the biggest thing for me that I did not expect. Once again, guys, you make your own conclusions. I'll probably gonna run 87 here, you know, when I'm just cruising around town, going to work, driving on the highway, doing road trips. But when I go to the track, I'll run 93, and it's the best of both worlds. You get, you know, cheaper cost to run most of the year, and then most performance when you need it. So I appreciate you guys watching. Huge thanks to TurnInConcepts for hosting us here. Very nice of them to let us do that. Stay tuned for more episodes from Eat, Sleep, Drive. We'll see you next time.